Good afternoon. I'm Jim Townsend, and I'm the director of the Levin Center for Oversight and Democracy here at Wayne State University Law School. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's post-election analysis panel. This is becoming something of a tradition here at the Levin Center, where since 2020, after each election, we have invited members of Congress, always one Democrat and one Republican, to provide their views on the meaning of the most recent election. I don't think I'm going out on a limb here to say that regardless of how you voted in the 2024 election, we can all agree that we are glad this exhausting campaign is over. One question that often gets asked after an election campaign is, what are the issues? What issues were really being contested? For me, one answer to that question that keeps coming back is the legitimacy of our institutions. It seems that in some ways our institutions, or the establishment, quote unquote, were at the center of this election, even if they were mentioned far less than immigration or inflation or access to abortion or wars overseas or other issues. A majority of voters chose the candidate for president who was anti-institutions and anti-establishment, and many believe anti-democracy, but who promised a different path to solving problems that was being offered than what was being offered by defenders of the institutions and democracy. Here at the Levin Center for Oversight and Democracy, we are concerned with oversight. That is fact-based efforts to hold the government accountable, and the relationship of that effort to democracy. We think if you don't have the former, a government that keeps its promises and is accountable for doing so, democracy will be meaningful to fewer and fewer people. That strikes me as one of the messages of the 2024 election, and it is among the issues that I'm hoping we can grapple with today. To help do this grappling, we are honored to have two veterans of Congress with remarkable track records in politics and public service. The first is Dan Kildee. He is a Democrat who serves in Congress. He's served there since 2013, and he currently represents Michigan's 8th congressional district, which includes his hometown of Flint, Michigan. He began his career in local government, where I met him over 20 years ago when he was Genesee County Treasurer, and he was creating Michigan's first land bank. Dan went on to co-found and direct the Center for Community Progress before running for Congress in 2012. Dan chose not to run for re-election in 2024. So Dan, welcome.
Thanks, Jim.
We also have with us Barbara Comstock, who is a Republican and former member of Congress from Virginia. She represented the 10th district from 2015 to 2019 and was named one of the top 10 most effective lawmakers in the 115th Congress by the Center for Effective Lawmaking. She's now a senior advisor at the law firm Baker Donaldson and serves as an ABC News political contributor. She also appears frequently on CNN, PBS, and MSNBC, and we are pleased to have her as a member of the Levin Center's advisory board. So the run of show here is I'm going to kick things off by asking an opening question to Barbara and Dan, and then we'll continue with a few more questions I have. I've also got questions that have been provided to me by law students here at Wayne State. I'm also going to be monitoring the Q&A feed here in the webinar. So please, if you have a question and you're online, feel free to submit that question. And we also have students who are just down the hall from me gathered to participate in this webinar, faculty, students, and staff there. And if they have a question, please submit it to Nathan from our team, who is there and can put it into the feed, and I can see it then. I'll do my best to get to every question, but I probably won't, given the limited time we have. I also want to mention that Congressman Kildee has a scheduling conflict that has just arisen, and that's going to cause him to have to depart a bit early, but Barbara and I will continue until about 1:15. So with that housekeeping out of the way, I'd like to kick off this conversation with sort of an opening question for you, Dan, and you, Barbara. What do you think was the single biggest factor that resulted in Trump's victory and the sweep of the Senate and likely retention of the House for the Republicans. One, what do you think was the biggest factor? And two, does this election suggest that the character of our country has changed in some way? And if so, how? Either one of you.
I'll let you go first, Dan. You go ahead. You're still in there.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me to participate. And it's great to be with Barbara. We served together, and I have tremendous respect for her and look forward to this discussion. I think, in a race like this, any one of a dozen factors going in a different direction could have changed the outcome. But I think as a Democrat, I have to be clear-eyed about our reality. If there's one thing we could have changed that may have given us a better chance, it would have been to have a more conventional process of nominating a candidate for president. President Biden made a decision long after the process was underway. I think he made the correct decision, but there's not much doubt that having a presidential campaign of 107 days on one side and of 4 years on the other side put us at a pretty significant disadvantage. Now, there are ways to overcome those disadvantages, and I don't think we did very well in doing it. The biggest effect of that change was, number one, to take away some of the Democrats' advantage of being sort of the party of the adults in the room, the party that has sort of a clear-eyed vision of how it wants to proceed. That was interrupted by the process of changing our nominee. But also the fact that Vice President Harris was ill-defined in the public eye prior to her nomination and was largely defined by some of the attacks that President-elect Trump launched against her. And we didn't do a very good job of pushing back. We didn't do a very good job of circling back to the core economic issues that we work on. But I mean, to answer your question as directly as I can, I wish this wasn't the case. But I think the fact that we went through the change that we did midstream was, in retrospect, much more damaging than many of us thought it would be at the time. We were better off with the change, but not as well off had we been going through a normal nominating process.
Barbara?
Okay, I'm actually, as a Republican, probably going to be a little less tough on the nominee. I actually was a Republican for Kamala Harris, and I come at this as somebody who's been against Donald Trump since 2016 when I was in office running with him. I think this is a unique situation where Trump has dominated the political landscape in a very unique and negative way. We are still a very divided and stressed country. I don't think, nothing in politics is ever as good as it seems or as bad as it seems. At the end of the day, when all the votes are in, it's only going to be 49.8 or so to 48.4. So it's only going to be like 1.5 in the popular vote. So this whole huge, it was a big mandate. It's not as big of a deal as he's saying. And yes, all the swing states that swung for Biden last time did swing for him. But again, also very narrowly, just as before, where Trump, the difference is Trump said they were stolen when he lost. And Kamala Harris has been very gracious and did something that Donald Trump didn't do 4 years ago, and she conceded. So you're not seeing all these rioting, and those of us who supported her aren't out being sore losers the way he was and all his supporters. So it doesn't seem as divisive and terrible as it was 4 years ago. Particularly, in Michigan, there were, you had your Secretary of State candidate just a few years ago who wouldn't concede when she lost by 16 points. So you have 50% of the country who voted for somebody else, essentially. And in this century, 11 of our, every 2 years when we vote, we have had 11 change elections out of 13. So if you look every 2 years, we have either changed the House, the Senate, or the White House, or a combination of. Every time, except 2004 and 2008, when we had the re-elect of George Bush and the re-elect of Barack Obama. So, you know, in 2006, Nancy, after we had this big win, I remember sitting with friends in 2004 after George Bush won the election. You know, he had only won very narrowly in 2000, 326 votes in Florida, that recount that took 5 weeks. In 2004, when he won re-elect, all my friends said, oh, Republicans, you're so good at this. We're never going to win. Democrats, it's all over. And then in 2006, Nancy Pelosi took the House, and you know, it was all over. And then in 2008, Barack Obama came back. And then I ran in 2009 in Virginia as a state delegate. And I remember when I started knocking on doors, everyone patted my head and said, oh, isn't that cute little girl? You're out there knocking on doors and running. This is a hopeless area. You are never going to win. And Terry McAuliffe was running for governor. And of course he was going to win. He didn't even win the nomination. A guy named Bob McDonnell won by 17 points. And me and 5 of my friends won a big, huge victory in the Virginia, Commonwealth of Virginia in the State House. So, and then in 2010, Republicans won back. And then we thought, oh, we're on a roll. We're going to push out Barack Obama. Mitt Romney's going to win. Then we lost in 2012. Oh, it's all over. We're never going to win. So right now we are in a divided government where it's 50-50 and they keep kicking people out. And guess what? All around the world during this post-pandemic time, the incumbents have been losing. So that is common. Now, with Donald Trump, you face this asymmetrical threat where the dude lies and he is a racist, he is a sexist, and the kind of fights that you had to fight. Now, I do think, you know, I think actually Democrats were very effective. I mean, you guys passed some, you know, the infrastructure bill that Donald Trump never did. You passed, you know, the CHIPS bill, which is great for our economy. You know, you passed the Marriage Act, which a lot of Republicans supported. You know, you have your litany of legislation that you passed very effective, but Donald Trump went around and Dow 43,000. Republicans are all claiming credit for this rally the past week. As a Republican, I was pretty happy with Dow 43,000 before the election, but you didn't hear about that. So, you know, this is, you know, this guy who went out there and went on all these podcasts like, I am so sick of hearing about Joe Rogan. This is a guy, which the press didn't remind you, just 2 years ago, big brouhaha, because this is a guy who uses the N-word, who is out there. He's a misogynist. He was using the N-word and saying, oh, gee, did I use the N-word? Didn't mean to. Don't want to harm my $100 million contract, hanging with the bros. And I'm sorry, I'm going to bash the Bernie bros and Bernie Sanders, who also has a lot of misogyny going on there. So the misogyny is bipartisan. So Hillary Clinton got misogyny, and also, you know, Kamala Harris got misogyny because the Bernie bros and those guys do the same thing to women as the Donald Trump bros do. So when they say, oh, gee, she should have gone on Joe Rogan. No, that's the problem. Now, on issues, yes, inflation, should have handled that sooner. The immigration problem, definitely should have handled that much sooner. Richie Torres was talking about that today. Should have been much more aggressive, gotten out there much sooner and done what they did this spring. So those are 2 issues that you never should have let Trump demagogue, because you know he was going to come at that, sending them to cities and all that stuff. But the yeast that makes Trumpism rise is racism and sexism. And that's what Kamala Harris was not. She almost overcame it. And that's why I came in and didn't, like last 2 times, I didn't support Trump, but I wrote in. I didn't actively support the Democrats. I came out and actively did it because I'm so sick of this racism and sexism in my own party and Republicans going along with it. And I'm sick of this. And now, as I see Democrats and Republicans saying, oh, we should have gone on Joe Rogan. Please, no, stop this acquiescing to this sexism and racism in this bro sphere that we're saying it's okay that these guys like Dana White, who, you know, it's a man's world and he's on camera slapping his wife around. this is wrong. Democrats and Republicans should be speaking up for it. We can have candidates who aren't misogynist.
But Barbara, let me ask you and Dan both about the second part of my question, which is the character of the country and
Right.
people's willingness
To support a
people across
sexual assault. Yeah, yeah.
people across demography, across sex, across race, across region, willing to ignore or even embrace the kind of rhetoric and really very threatening rhetoric that was coming from the Trump campaign and from the candidate. Why was that? Why do people do that? Does that reflect a real change in our country?
Yeah,
I think it does. I'll say, because I think it certainly reflects a change in my party and people willing to blatantly lie for the past 4 years and to allow him to lie. And now everybody who he's putting in his cabinet, even if they're good on some policies, the fundamental thing they have to do is they have to be people who have loyalty to him first, not the Constitution or the rule of law. Yes, they might be good on some issues. They may be okay on tax. I mean, listen, I voted for the tax bill. There are plenty of policies that I like, but I would rather give back the run-up that I've had on my stocks the past week to have somebody who respects the rule of law and isn't going to endanger the lives of my granddaughters and has the attitude of this man. But, instead it's a man's world and we're just all living in it and got to deal with that. No offense to current, I'm talking about the misogynist men.
Yeah, first of all, let me say how much I appreciate Barbara's perspective on all this, because it's good to hear this from a person who recognizes that we need the Republican Party to reestablish itself as the true Republican Party, where we have some policy disagreements, but that it's a legitimate set of philosophies of government. What we have with this current configuration of the Republican Party is the worship of a single person, and really not a whole lot of policy that is driving many of the people who are the members of Congress, for example, the House and Senate, seem to have sworn some fealty to this guy. But to your question, has the country changed? Yes, it has, in this respect. What the era of Trump has done has legitimized what had been, I think, latent sexism and misogyny, racism, that the norms of our society had been addressing, and taken much of that behavior and characterized it as unacceptable. And with the era of Trump, with his brash language and his use of invectives, it's clear that he has allowed some people who otherwise were keeping it to themselves to suddenly celebrate, using his language, celebrate their biases, celebrate their prejudice. And so the reason I think the country has changed in that respect is not just because of Trump, but because of the way we produce and consume information in this era.
Yeah, and see, if I had been in Congress, I would have been saying, hey, let's get the border under control. We need to do something. We shouldn't be sent. This isn't fair to the cities. So I acknowledge that all those issues were problems. Yeah. I acknowledge that inflation is a problem, the price of eggs. But then there are bright lines of things that are unacceptable.
Right.
The price of eggs does not legitimize racism. Yeah. Or every day and Sunday attacking women as stupid, as bird brains, as Coco Chow calling Mitch McConnell's wife.
So let me ask though, it used to be that political parties would rein in that kind of behavior, would not feature that kind of candidate, would find a way.
We kicked out some members who spoke like that. Now
that was once upon a time.
That's what he does.
So why? So what I want to ask you, what do the political parties need to do? And I obviously the focus here is on the Republican Party and its allegiance to President-elect Trump. But there was also mention made of bias and racism and so on that has emerged in parts of the Democratic coalition. And obviously a lot of Democrats weren't put off by the Trump rhetoric and went ahead and voted for him. So political parties used to be able to discipline and filter out that kind of behavior now they can't. What do we need our parties to do? Do you have some ideas about what political parties need to
Yeah.
do to get stronger?
I mean, let's be clear. When we're talking about political parties, I agree with you. There used to be the ability for us to essentially discipline ourselves and discipline our own members. But that was political parties in that context, and in virtually every context, are people. It's really leadership is what it comes down to. The entire question comes down to whether or not in positions of authority, where people have a significant platform from which to speak, they are willing to tell some of their own members or supporters something that it's going to be hard for them to hear, to tell them a truth that is going to be painful. My favorite professor at the Kennedy School, Marty Linsky, teaches that leadership is the act of disappointing your own supporters at a rate they can absorb. And what we have now, with some exceptions, obviously, is an environment where people are less likely to do that. I mean, and look at what has happened, just using the Republican Party as an example. And this is something that could happen in the Democratic Party as well, occasionally does. But look at what has happened to those courageous Republicans who have been willing to say the emperor has no clothes. They're attacked. And the worst of the worst sins, in my view, are not the sins of those people like Trump, because he's predictable. It's the broad majority, and I'm thinking about the members of Congress, Barbara, that you and I have served with.
It's the silence.
Who know better.
Yeah.
And sit silently because they don't want to get in the firing line. They don't want to take
literally, because it's death threats.
Right, precisely.
We all
It
get.
is. And so this is a moment of truth. And when we've seen people who have been willing to stand up, Barbara, a good example, Liz Cheney, a good example, Fred Upton, a good example, lots of others. What's the result? They're isolated, ostracized, minimized, and somehow I still believe that the vast majority of Republicans serving in Congress even today, even those who supported the effort to not certify the 2020 election, have a guilty conscience. And I'd rather not them have a guilty conscience. I'd rather them suffer whatever pain comes with telling the truth. And I take this personally because I was there on January 6th and I was a part of this whole thing. And the notion that not only have we wiped away culpability of Donald Trump for January 6th, we've erased the culpability of those members of Congress who created the necessary precondition for January 6th to exist. And that is go along with the pretense that election was stolen. Barbara, I think you said it poetically. It's so interesting how now, suddenly, according to Trump and the people around him, our process of electing electors to the Electoral College is perfect, when 4 years ago, it was a train wreck. I mean,
same people, same operations. And when his name's out on the ballot, everything's fine.
Right.
I mean, really, unless his name or a few, Carrie Lake was bad last time. Now she's lost. Nobody has the patience for her again. But really, unless it's Trump, now there will be some people. For one good case that happened today, Mark Meadows, who's still under indictment in state indictment, which cannot be pardoned by the president. He is under indictment with other false electors in Georgia and Arizona. I don't know, you may have some cases like that in Michigan. And those cases will go forward. Those cases cannot be pardoned by Donald Trump. He's getting off the hook on a lot of the federal things, but he cannot pardon the state cases. So Mark Meadows will have to, and others will have to go forward on that. And the sad thing is, until they lose, I mean, that was the only thing, that is going to stop this, because this has emboldened everybody. See, we lied. Trump lies for us. The market goes up. This all works out. Hey, depending on what happens in Ukraine, if people get slaughtered, hey, we walk away from that. If nobody cares, then maybe it doesn't matter. That pains me to great, And
I want to
so,
get to a question from Melissa Burke of the Detroit News, who's joining us. She asked the following question. I'm curious about Rep. Kildee's take, and I think she'd be interested in Barbara's take as well, but she started with Rep. Kildee's take on why so many working people said they voted for Trump because they felt that Democrats weren't doing enough for them.
Yeah, I mean, that's frustrating. And I did hear that. But it's really frustrating because in truth, the economy that we're experiencing right now is a growing economy. We are reshoring manufacturing in my own district. I didn't run again, but my successor was able to benefit from this. In my own district, we've seen significant new investment in manufacturing. But this generalized anxiety that exists in society creates an underpinning where negative messaging is pretty easily accepted. And I think the final conclusion that I've come to in all of this is that truth takes longer for people to absorb than an incendiary, outrageous lie. And what the big difference between Democrats and Republicans in this last
asymmetrical threat.
It's an asymmetrical threat. We limit ourselves in our argumentation largely to truth. Donald Trump and the people around him have no such restriction. And with a constant barrage of information, if you tell somebody that whatever circumstance in their life makes them unhappy, whatever level of anxiety they're experiencing about their own future, that they can blame somebody else for that and not accept the fact that there actually is change coming and it takes time. Like, for example, if we had been able to produce some of the legislation that is reshoring manufacturing, say 2 years earlier, and it was actually being experienced rather than simply announced, that may have made a difference. Barbara's point, and I do have to depart, Barbara's point at the outset is a really important one. The marginal difference between winning and losing in these elections are, if you're looking at a crowd of 100 people, change 2 minds out of that 100, and you've changed the election result.
Yeah, I mean, Alyssa Slotkin is there, so I think they,
Exactly.
There's that marginal difference between Senator Slotkin and the top of the ticket. A lot of the people just voted for Trump at the top, then didn't go down and vote the bottom of the ticket. So you do have a unique electorate who only turns out for Trump in some of these states and not the others. So I would argue the message does get through to some extent. And I would think things like, I didn't vote to repeal Obamacare because the Freedom Caucus wanted to take away pre-existing conditions. So I pointed out to people, listen, Republicans who want to take away funding for pre-existing conditions, that is not a good thing. I would not support that. Once again, they want to take that away. We kept trying to highlight that. I'll tell you, the press doesn't like that. They'd rather just run around and, talk and let Donald Trump say Kamala Harris is stupid. I can't tell you how many times he would say things and make vile attacks against Kamala Harris. And I remember I said on the press one day, I said, you know who is the stupidest man I was ever in a room with when I was in politics? Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And I had a reporter stop and say to me, oh, please tell me how. And I stopped and said, you guys never ask Donald Trump to explain how someone is stupid. You just let him say people are stupid. And you never question the man who has never released his grades, never, explains his programs, how he's, he doesn't have a healthcare plan. He never had an infrastructure bill. He doesn't have a way to build the wall and never did build it. Yet he can attack everybody as stupid and never show his grades. I think he said he would, attack anyone who showed his grades. I think his own family has said, or members of his family implied that he didn't even take his test to get into school. So things like that the press never questions him on. White privilege there, guys, not a term I usually use, but he can make these attacks on women and everybody else. Yet if you say the same thing back to him, then everybody is required to, oh, please explain how this stupid man who, makes so many dumb comments every day is stupid. It's like, well, could we sit down for an hour and I'll give you a whole book on it?
So Dan, I know you've got to leave
Yeah.
us. I want to thank you for being with us. Barbara, you and I are gonna stick around and continue chatting and continue taking more questions.
Thank you.
Dan, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your service. And I hope we can continue to be working with you in your next chapter.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks, Barbara. Good to see you.
Sure.
All right.
No, I'll tell you, for the reporter, I would point out things like, people didn't ask Donald Trump, are you going to continue the cap on prescription drugs? Nobody ever asked them things like that, because that was brought to you by the Democrats. Listen, I was supporting this ticket, so I became knowledgeable on things that I knew people like my parents care about. So if you're going to have $35 insulin, a cap on prescription drugs, these are things that this Democratic ticket brought to you, yet Donald Trump never answered for it. So these are things, I'm not sure why people didn't understand that was there. They extended it. She was going to extend the child tax credit that the Republicans in the Senate refused to vote for when Democrats tried to bring it to the table. J.D. Vance ran out the door and wouldn't vote on it. She said she was going to, have that tax credit for home buyers. Donald Trump had no plan for home buyers. He just said, hey, everything stinks and I'll fix it.
So let me synthesize a little bit, Barbara, let me synthesize a little bit, and then I want to get to some more questions. We have some great questions. We've got more questions, we have time. But it seems like what you and Dan were saying essentially is elections are very close. There is a very frequent situation where power shifts from one party to the other, but we have a different circumstance here because the threat posed by the party that will now be in power is led by somebody who has enormous control over that party, much more control
but with a House that's going to probably be 220 to 215. So if somebody gets a cold, you're going to, and now he's taking two people out to be in the administration. So while those elections are being run, it'll be 218 to 215.
But still the incentive, I mean, we talk about how close it is, but the reality was that we do have one side of this equation that is much more willing, I think it's fair to say, to distort the facts, to lie. How do we, and there seems to be a payoff for doing that, right? In close elections, you can persuade people with very incendiary accusations, very incendiary rhetoric, and you don't seem to pay a price. What can we do in our institutions? Is there a role for Congress in the oversight process or in some other process to try to, maybe there's something from the states, what can we do to start bringing factual discourse back to public life in our country?
Well, I think in practical reason, I think the only thing that really does tune it up is for good candidates to get back out there and tune them up by winning. And they're really institutionally, the only thing people respond to in politics is winning. So that is the tragedy of this year. It's very narrow, but they won. And so you have to give them their win. They're going to be running things. It's going to be narrow. I think given these 11 out of 13 changes, chances are the House will go to the Democrats in the midterm. So they only have 2 years. They're going to slam as many things through as possible. But, Democrats are going to have to get back to some of those kitchen table issues, maybe get away from, some of the cultural battles that they're getting hit on. But I think they've got some good kitchen table issues that they can argue on and get candidates that are more center left. I mean, we have in Virginia, we have a candidate who's running for governor who it looks like she should probably easily win and carry some seats. And that's usually what happens in an off-year election. So when you have that happen, then that scares everyone else, because then you go, oh no, the midterms are coming and what's going to happen? And that usually tunes up everybody that maybe we're getting out of line. But the problem is for the Republicans who are in there, Trump is looking at this. He's a lame duck. He wants to take this, the Freedom Caucus and this group of people he's got in there. They see this as this huge mandate when it's, even those 53 senators, it's very narrow that they won by. And, I mean, they're still, even, Pennsylvania, wherever, they're all narrow. And you start slamming through big changes, you get in a 50-50 country, you get that blowback real quick. And the blowback comes in the House, it comes in state legislatures, and they send you a message real quick. So institutionally, it's the people's house. It's the state houses and it's the House of Representatives that sends that message really quick. And I think also in the media has some accountability here too, because the media is changing. The mainstream media, was treating Trump like a normal person. And then J.D. Vance has the same manner of lying about things that he does, but that Trump does. But I think, these podcasts and these bro things that are going on, I think women need to realize, we have, there is a misogyny out there, there's racism out there that we have to deal with in some other ways, but it's not something that we can't overcome because, we've had to work harder in every other area that we've had to deal with these things anyway. So,
Barbara, I want to shift gears. We've gotten several questions from the audience about the rule of law and what you think is coming our way in terms of the risks that this election is going to lead to a great deal of backsliding related to the rule of law, to a real shift in terms of the way that law enforcement is approached in this country, is certainly from the federal level, and that accountability essentially for breaking the law, if you're in the right position, will change. What are you seeing? What do you think is going to come our way?
Well, one of my previous jobs was I was only the public affairs director at the Justice Department, but obviously worked with all the senior Justice Department officials post 9/11. I'm very concerned with who will be at the Justice Department because already people there have been sending out messages. If you're not going to get with the president's program, get out now. And they're basically threatening career federal employees who you need to have them there on all kinds of issues that you need to know. I mean, there are a lot of issues that the FBI and the Justice Department handle that aren't political issues. Yet the threat to both the FBI and the Justice Department, as well as Homeland, CIA, other, law enforcement agencies, is real. So I think that's where the Senate in the confirmation process, another area where Trump is trying to say, I want to just have recess appointments and I don't want any questions to my, appointment authority. Even some Senate Republicans are going to have to, put on their big boy pants and say, no, we are going to use our constitutional responsibility of, looking at these appointees and not putting people like Kash Patel at the CIA, who spent a large part of his last 4 years hanging out with Steve Bannon, who just got out of jail.
So just to make that point clear for everybody, there is a discussion going on in Washington about what's called a recess appointment process, whereby the Senate would have to have the agreement of the House, would go into recess for a period of time, presumably early in the new year, that period during which, under the Constitution, the president could make appointments to his cabinet that would last for the entirety of the Congress for the next 2 years, and not be subject to advice and consent from the Senate. In other words, the Senate would not be able to have a confirmation process because they've allowed the appointment during recess.
So we could put a lot of these more incendiary characters, some of these people in the assistant secretary positions who are very problematic, and people who wouldn't ordinarily be confirmed or even get through background checks could go in through this area because the threat would be, to some of these senators, I'll primary you, your next race, I'll be going after you. And there's every indication that a lot of these senators will kind of roll over, which the ones running for leadership have already said, well, that's open to, recess appointments are something we're open to. Now, Democrats can filibuster that. and keep it open, and hopefully they
I'm
would. But
not
I
so
think,
sure if that's the case, actually. I think we looked into this. We're not sure that you
yeah,
can, I don't believe you can filibuster
well,
this particular question.
but I mean, well, even conservatives are saying if you can't
Right.
get 53 votes for some of your nominees, maybe you shouldn't, you got 53 senators, find some people, because already you have Democrats saying, hey, we'll vote for Marco Rubio. We'll vote, for some of these people you've already appointed, even some we're not going to agree with, obviously, where they're at on things, but, they're not people
Right.
that they're going to oppose. But you have to have people who can pass minimal background checks and, haven't been, I mean, you don't want somebody like, say, a disbarred lawyer running the Justice Department, or people who've been involved in scandals already. I mean, some of the people they've mentioned for the Justice Department are people like Jeff Clark, who's been involved in all kinds of scandals involved with January 6th. And these are some of the people, certainly at the Justice Department or the FBI, some of the people that have been named, as well as Kash Patel at the CIA, are very problematic people who certainly should not be in there, even if you are a Republican. So I am very concerned about the rule of law in that regard. Now, there is a way of thinking that people say, just give them everybody they want, let them run roughshod and see how ugly it's going to be. But I mean, I represented a lot of these career employees, and these are people who've dedicated their lives, say, to being China experts, Russia experts, working in these agencies. He wants to abolish the education department. So, being able just to go in and fire employees at will, and then having people who will do that, because, you're going to have people who he'll put in there without confirmation, and then, yes, they might get sued, but then the legal process will take a long time. And in the meantime, people have lost their jobs, they're out of work, and, they're, at home waiting to be put back to work. And there'll be all kinds of consequences for them personally, as well as for the entire region that, we live in here, but also, to the impact to our government and how it functions. I think there are real threats there. That
So on the top, let me ask you a
considered.
question that was provided to us by a group of Wayne State University law students. The Voting Rights and Election Law Group has submitted a few questions that I think really speak to this. One of them is, there was a lot of talk about Project 2025 during the election cycle. President-elect Trump embraced that initially and then distanced himself from it. What is your take from what you're hearing about how much of Project 2025 is likely to be implemented?
Well, I think that's the reason why he wants these, recess appointments, because there's no question that those people would be implementing a lot of Project 2025. I mean, the, Stephen Miller, who was very involved in it, is his deputy chief of staff at the White House. Homan, the deportation czar, wrote, the deportation chapter in Project 2025, eliminating the Department of Education, which he says he wants to do. That's part of it. So this recess appointment idea was part of that. So already, again, Trump lies, he gets away with it, then he gets in, and then he has no guardrails because he's not running again, although who knows, maybe he will try to run again because he'll argue he can. So I'm very concerned that they will very much try and implement a whole lot of it. So fortunately, in this area, some of the very close races, even in Virginia and in Maryland, Democrats did win to fight that. So there were 3 races here regionally that came down to 2%, 4%, 1% that fortunately did win. I endorsed in those races as a Republican, endorsed Democrats, because I was concerned about that I did not believe those lies. And I have no doubt that they will try to enforce that. And as you know, the Washington Post decided not to endorse in this race. The Washington Post, while they covered Project 2025 a little bit, the Washington Post has kind of disappeared as a paper of local record and is kind of not aggressively really gone after those local concerns anymore.
Speaking of the rule of law, just going back to that issue a little bit, this is another question that came from our students. Senator Schumer, Chuck Schumer of New York, the currently Senate Majority Leader, has introduced a thing called the No Kings Bill, which would remove presidential and vice presidential immunity. Do you think there's any chance of that becoming law?
Not this Congress. No.
So there's really no way to move forward.
No, the way this Congress is going to work, particularly in the House, Trump will just send up the edict. This is what I want. With 220 votes, they'll pretty much all get in line.
Mm-hmm.
I will be surprised to see much, if any, deviation in the House. In the Senate, you do have Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, who have shown independence in the past, and Mitch McConnell, who is retiring, so you still have that, and Todd Young, who did not endorse or support Donald Trump in this past election. Now, Susan Collins and Todd Young are up in 2026, but they have been independent, and Mitch McConnell's retiring in 26. So those are 4 people who might show some independence. Maybe there are some others who might be retiring, but as you saw with impeachment back, in 2020, or the people who retired in 2022, even those who knew they were retiring didn't vote for impeachment. So it's amazing how much these guys get in line.
Mm-hmm. I want to, you made mention earlier, just briefly, of the conflict in Ukraine. I want to ask you, again, this is another question from our students about international relations. How do you see this election result affecting the situation with our relationship to NATO, as well as some of the other areas, hotspots around the world, obviously Taiwan, what's going on in Gaza, in addition to Ukraine? What's your general sense, or what are you hearing about what we can expect in the coming years?
Well, the appointees so far with Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz and Elise Stefanik, while they have been very, loyal to Trump, I think they've all supported, they're all big supporters of Israel. They have supported Ukraine. But of course, you have Trump and Vance and actually Mike Johnson, the speaker, recently saying, we're not doing any more Ukraine packages. So how will that all work itself out? I think people are encouraged by these appointees. And Mitch McConnell, of course, this is his, swan song of what he wants to do is support Ukraine. So how will that play out? That's going to be tough because he and Schumer have worked closely together on that. So there still is a hope that something will happen there. How it will be done, how they will work around Trump on this. Does Trump want to have a disaster on his watch on that? Can they somehow convince him that it would be a disaster if that happened? That's the big question. I mean, I am very despondent about, certainly I think Vance has been horrible on this, the things he said and how bad he is on this issue. Certainly the love that he and Trump have of Putin and the things that he's said are shameful. But you do hope that those 300 members of the House and the support in the Senate might somehow combine to overcome that. So I'm not sure how. I mean, it played itself out last year, but now you're not getting, you get mixed signals. So how that plays out is the big mystery right now. But since it's so important in this, but could people just walk away? That's what I despair of.
I think one of the things that we've all been absorbing a lot of commentary and looking at a lot of analysis of what this election means. One of the things that struck me that I read recently was something that's been said about President-elect Trump before, which is that he's very concerned about ratings. That his orientation is very much toward his popularity, and that one thing that might govern him to some degree to try to avoid disasters like some sort of a tremendous catastrophe in, say, Ukraine or something similar, is that could take a real his ratings, if you will,
Yes.
could take a
Yeah.
real hit. Now nobody
But
knows.
that's the pitch. Yeah, your ratings will get hurt. Yeah.
But nobody knows, I think, whether he'll have the same view of ratings now that he's a lame duck president, and that running for reelection, at least presumably, is not on the agenda. He might be seeing things differently. But what do you his initial appointments? The signals he's sending about who he's trying to put in his cabinet, does that suggest that he's maybe going to pick certain battles but avoid other ones that might damage his ratings?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think a lot of what he's doing too is, I mean, you look at, he wants to be Orban. He's very transactional. He's got these, with Elon Musk in there, and all this, he's looking to his post-presidency and, kind of deal making, post-presidency in a way too, his companies that he's may or may not put to the side. I mean, the guy was selling watches and Bibles and, his media company during the race, and who knows what he's going to do with that, or if anyone's going to require him to, he never has disclosed his tax records ever either. So all the way he's been, and of course his son-in-law famously, gotten a $2 billion, deal, Ivanka and Jared, since. So how they are playing this out financially and what they stand to gain financially may be more what he's looking at than anything else too. So I mean, I guess I'm cynical that he looks at this like Orban. So is he going to be,
right,
like Orban, which is,
we have a
Orban's an isolationist and a kleptocrat. So if that's his model, does that work well for Ukraine or not? Orban's not been a friend of Ukraine.
I want to shift gears back a little bit because of some good questions, interesting questions that have come from the audience about the way the vote turned out among certain groups. And one of the groups that's been emphasized by one audience member who's really asked some interesting questions. A person named Rosa from Saginaw is talking about her experience in the Latino community and the way it reacted to this election, and the kind of interesting results where some people thought the Latino vote would go very heavily toward the Democrats for some, for reasons related to President-elect Trump's rhetoric. That did not turn out to be the case, and I think she's wondering. A lot of people are wondering, what will it take to get to try to win back or strengthen support among these communities that have been demonized, but are also seeing their self-interest in supporting somebody like Donald Trump?
Well, again, I think the inflation factor and some of the border issues, and I mean the economy in general. But as with other things, the increase in the Latino vote, I mean, because Kamala Harris still did win it, but where it got worse for Democrats was more in the male vote than the female. So while it did deteriorate, it deteriorated more in the male area. So again, the misogyny, which is the yeast of Trumpism, it does appeal to, it crosses all races, what Trump does. So it's not just white males that he appeals to. So that is a factor of how he operates. So, it's a sad factor of how he does that.
Now we're kind of getting sort of close to the end of our time together, but I did want to tap into your experience as a former state official, somebody who served in public office at the state level. You made a brief reference to that. How do you see this playing out across the country? Are there going to be efforts at the state level to react to some of the policies that may come from the Trump administration, to try to be a bit of a bulwark against maybe some things that really do worry a lot of people or cause people to be very, very concerned? Where do you think states come into this whole equation?
Well, I think you always have to be focused first and foremost on the economy. And obviously, I think, listen, I think the reason why you did, I mean, where you lost, where Trump did try and appeal, I mean, I'm not at all discounting that the economy is what first gave him the inroad to be able to appeal to all the voters. But, when you combine that with these other things that he did, that gives him a little bit more of an edge. But I think on the state level, you just get back to doing things like, what somebody like Josh Shapiro. I mean, Josh Shapiro won in double digits in Pennsylvania by dealing with crime issues, dealing with the economy. He did I mean, Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania has done tax cuts and dealt with crime, and went around and visited in every community. In the rural communities, he's bolstered the Democratic Party in rural areas as well as in the cities. So he's, you got to go and visit all communities and not just be a Democrat who's in, I mean, I'm talking like but that's, as a Republican, I did that too. When I was I lived in, when I won my district, I was in a blue area as a Republican. So I didn't just say, I'm going to go hang out in the red areas. I went into the blue areas and said, hey, here's what I'm working on. And didn't, and tried, because the issues that you're working on usually aren't blue or red. They're like, what moves us forward? And when you talk to people about, jobs, schools for their kids, and issues that move you forward, usually you can put together a coalition that way. And the one thing Trump has really never done is try and build a bigger coalition that way. Like on election day, they were all saying, if you know any men who haven't voted, get out the men. I mean, his whole coalition has been about, now he's got white women, white women are, so, okay. A lot of white women who aren't working. So he's got a whole resentment going on. Like, that's great if you don't have to work. Okay, that's good. But a lot of people have to work. We don't have the luxury of not working, or our kids don't. So kind of setting people against each other is not a good way. You want to build, people to work together. And that's sort of certainly, I think, what people were, I think a good candidate. I mean, our governor in Virginia is pretty popular, and I think he's been better at trying to bring people together, not divide them. And I think
that's
some of these issues,
Governor Glenn Youngkin, you're speaking.
yeah, Glenn. And so I think people who govern on the state level, where you have to balance your budgets, you have to work on these kitchen table issues. When governors do that, they usually end up being pretty popular, Democrat or Republican, because like, Chris Sununu in New Hampshire did that. Kelly Ayotte, who's a Republican, just won in New Hampshire, and she's done, she was an attorney general. She focused on crime. She focused on things. When you do kind of these hot button issues, like I thought, I think like these trans ads they ran that really were creating issues that don't, I mean, they're kind of ugly. Like, people don't have tons of kids on their kids' teams, that are trans kids that are running your little girls over. I have 7 grandkids. None of them have a bunch of boys on their girls' teams doing that. Those things can be dealt with on the local level. Your sports leagues can deal with that, or your local schools can deal with that. That's not a federal government issue, but they ran those ads because they thought that would work, somebody. And
it seems to have had an impact.
Yeah, no, I get that it works. But then you look at, like, there's an issue that's going to be before the Supreme Court saying, okay, but if you have an issue like a parent is trying to deal with medical issues, dealing with that, do you really want the state coming in and telling you, the parent, whether you can medically deal with your child or not on these issues? If it's a contraception issue or an abortion issue or a trans medication issue, do you want the state telling you whether or not you can do it? Because Mike DeWine in Ohio and Asa Hutchinson in Arkansas both vetoed those bills. Now in Tennessee, they signed that bill and said, as a parent, you cannot make the decision.
Right. So
we, the governor, said, so I'm saying like conservatives have a lot of things like, do you really want the conservatives to come in and micromanage your lives on some of these issues? So I think there's a lot of things on the local level that we need to get out of. And
So the opportunity at the state and local level seems to be one
get
where
back to
government
economics,
accountability,
schools,
things like.
letting people, get back to, and that's why like the abortion referendums, they failed in most states. Now they did succeed like in South Dakota and some other state, but most of the states, even conservative ones, they've now enshrined a right to an abortion because people have gotten frightened by even
Right.
women who have miscarried children that they wanted, found themselves unable to get health care and unable to get a D&C when they've miscarried and have a child and they're bleeding and they're told, sorry, can't help you. So, Republicans have not come up with an answer for that. And so I think Democrats do have opportunities there, but I think Republicans also have opportunities to go in there and say, hey, we never meant to go that far. And Kelly Ayotte, who ran in New Hampshire, said, abortion is legal here in New Hampshire. And they were trying to run against her saying, hey, you're pro-life, you're going to mess this up. And she said, I am not touching the law. I am not going to do anything to change it. And she won saying, I am not going to change your abortion law. So I think it's going to be interesting to see going forward how Republicans deal with these things and get back in the middle, and how Democrats do the same thing and say, we're not fighting culture wars either. We just want to get your economic problem solved and, get your kids, get new jobs. I mean, there's a new economy out there.
Tackle cost of housing. You're right.
Yeah, get your kids out of your basement and get them back to work, upscale them. I mean, there's a lot of, this whole Joe Rogan culture that's, talking to kids who's saying, you don't have jobs. Well, there's a whole bunch of jobs out there that people don't know about that I think public officials should be, because that's what I work on now. I work on all these jobs that are out there. I mean, Virginia has tens of thousands of cybersecurity jobs that we need to fill. So if you're out there, you don't even need to go to college to get them. You can get certificates that they'll train you to go and do them. So you don't need to be sitting in your basement. We can get you, they will pay you to come and get trained on them. Walmart has a Walmart Academy to teach you how to come and do business and work at Walmart so that you can be, a future assistant manager and get paid six-figure salaries. Amazon has the same kind of program where they'll train you and you get healthcare from day one in all these jobs. So there's all kinds of jobs out there that people don't even know about in our economy that's growing, that our public officials need to start telling everybody about, because we've got a pretty darn good economy that's already out there.
We've now come pretty much to the end of our time, but I have one final closing question that I'd love for you to address. Again, this comes from our voting rights and election law group here, of law students here at Wayne State. And they asked this: for those disappointed by the results, what is your call to action? And they say, especially for law students, but you can broaden it beyond that if you want. What is your call to action? What do you have to say to people in response to if those of us who were disappointed by the election?
Well, first of all, our system worked. It worked in 2020, and it worked even better this year, even though I don't like the result. Our system is legal and works. Now, Donald Trump only says it works when he wins, but stay engaged, stay involved. We are a 50-50 country, but people who, in the long term, people who build up coalitions and who work together and get out there in the grassroots and work hard and, care about our system, they do win in the long run. This is disappointing. I mean, it's, this has been a frustrating situation for a lot of us who, this is, but we've seen demagogues before. This has been part of the process, for, in the past, but in the long run, democracy will survive when good people get engaged and involved and push back. And you do see on the narrow margins how, you had a senator who won and pushed back on that. You see, throughout the country. And I think this will be another, Trump does himself in every time. So I think this will be a short-term majority again. And there'll be the legal system, will prevail. And on the voting rights, you know, any attempt that they have to try and, you know, attack the voting systems, you know, there are good lawyers who are out there working quickly to, you know, nip that in the bud wherever they try and do that. But our system did work well this year. Gosh, even though there were all kinds of Russian bomb threats that were false threats, but in Georgia, I think in Pennsylvania, I think in Arizona that happened. And we were more prepared this time than ever before. We just had, like I said, this asymmetrical threat of Trump that we've got to figure out how to get past it. It's challenging when, you know, this is and hopefully we don't have it for much long. You know, it is just a one-term guy. Unfortunately, there are people who are coming in and try and imitate it, but a lot of them trying to imitate him failed. That's the good news. A lot of his imitators did fall even this year. You know, look, you saw in Michigan. I mean, I knew Mike Rogers. I knew Mike Rogers when who ran for Senate in Michigan. When he told me he couldn't stand Donald Trump, he was like us, and you know all the bad things he said. And people saw fake MAGA didn't work in a lot of places. You know, most places it didn't prevail, and that's why the margins are as close as now. This year just happened to be a good year in the Senate for Republicans. In 2026, it's not that good of a year. They'll probably lose a few seats in 26 and gain back the House. So, like I said, nothing is ever as good in politics as it seems or as bad as it seems. So that's why you have to, you know, stay engaged. And like my friends in 2004 who thought it was all over, or you think, boy, when Reagan won re-election in 1984 and got 49 states, you know, in 1986, he lost the Senate. So
like a permanent majority in that
49 states, and then he loses the Senate 2 years later. Like, you know, this country doesn't ever hand you a mandate to go running away blind. The American people are the best check, and staying active is how you keep our electeds in check.
Well, Barbara, I think that's a great place to wrap things up. I just can't thank you enough for being with us today, and also being such an integral part of the Levin Center's advisory board. This is obviously not at all to paint a rosy picture in terms of what the next number of years are gonna be. But as you mentioned, you know, like the electoral system that did function very effectively, and one of the reasons it functioned so well this time is it's very decentralized.
Yes.
We have a federal, you know, system in government, and a very much of a state-based system in our elections. In other words, federalism, which empowers states, works and keeps our elections safe. It also probably is a very effective vehicle for holding this administration accountable, and perhaps countering some real excesses that may come our way. So
yeah,
it
would help if we had more investigative reporting. We do not have that anymore, because we will not have real oversight given the Center for Oversight. We will not have oversight in Congress of this administration for the next 2 years. So that is one thing that will be missing. And there is not investigative reporting of much anymore. So that is a real missing piece in the corporate media right now. There are a few areas where they're trying to do a little bit more of it, but that is an area that could, you know, you do have a lot of wealthy people who own media, but they aren't too interested in doing much in that area these days.
I think in both the legislative oversight side, as well as the part of the ecosystem that the media represents, I think the answer, and we should wrap with this, is really that there needs to be innovative and creative approaches to trying to conduct this kind of oversight, whether that's in government or outside of government, because we just can't take the next couple of years off. We've got to, more than ever, there's got to be a spotlight shown on what government's doing and holding it accountable. Well, Barbara, again, thank you so much. To our audience, thank you for joining us. This recording will be posted very soon on our website. That's levin-center.org. And stay tuned for future events. And thank you again for joining us.